So, welcome to the second day of session, the first full day, long day, still ahead of us. It's really important to recognize that the session experience is not separate from the rest of your life. It took me a long time to get this. I used to go on session and go back to my corporate job. And it would feel like the session part was the dream or the illusion. But it was actually the corporate life that was the illusion or the dream. The session part, being here now, being present, allowing your mind to relax, being with what is, that's what's real. And when we take that mind back into our real life, full of all of our struggles, we see things much more clearly. We have a much more realistic perception of what's true, what's not true. And it allows us to accept those things that we want to push away, that we don't really want to, we don't want to accept them. We want them to go away. We want them to be different. We spend so much of our life wishing it was different. We only want the good parts, the pleasurable parts. So, this session is our third session, talking about the Diamond Sutra. It's such a rich sutra. It's such a rich sutra. So I'm going to talk today about the chapter 17, which is about no self. So what is no self? It's a concept that's kind of hard to get, since we're so embedded in self. It's hard to imagine not having a self, or what that is. So the simplest way of thinking about it, the way it was originally taught to me actually, which was through the Shambhala tradition, or through Trungpa Rinpoche's tradition, they talk about ego. And that is a way of getting at it, but it's not the whole story. It's not the whole story. But it's true that the ego and the self are the source of most of our suffering, certainly of the avoidable suffering. There's always the suffering of loss when we lose somebody we care about. That's unavoidable. Death is the other half of life. It's a mystery, but it's definitely part of our life, and recognizing that is important. I have a friend who's been recovering from breast cancer. So for the last about 9 months, she's been dealing with breast cancer. Chemo, mastectomy, trying to work. It's hard. So she was telling me the other day about some small problem in her life. And she said, but for some reason it didn't upset me at all. And I said, you've been dealing with death for the last 6 months. It changes your perspective about what's real and what's not real, what's not important. When you're dealing with death, when you're really facing it, staring it down, everything shifts a little bit. So the ego is the source of all of our other suffering, not to do with loss. Just think about it. Where do you suffer? You all come here because you suffer. Of course, maybe by the end of the week you'll be suffering from bad knees and bad back and pain in your body. Maybe you already are. Doesn't take long. That's not ego. But there is in that an attachment. In that suffering is an attachment to a healthy body, to no pain. So that's where ego is not the whole story. So think about your ego in terms of work, significant other, family. Where do you suffer? That's clearly ego. How unnecessary it is. Things change all the time, constantly changing, causing us lots of suffering. But if we just go with it, recognize it, our life gets immediately easier. This is what's happening. This is where I'm suffering. I want it to be different. It's not going to be different. It's going to be what it is. So another source of our suffering related to no self is separation. As soon as we separate ourselves into self and other, we have lots of suffering. So much blaming that goes on between couples. And until the couple transcends blaming the other and takes responsibility, 100% of the responsibility, nothing changes. As soon as that happens, it's like everything got better all at once. It's amazing. Of course, we slip back into blaming. Our ego doesn't go away forever. But it can begin to shift. That's what Sesshin allows us to see, is that it can shift, that we can live with our life just as it is. So dualistic thinking, me and them, me and him, me and her, source of suffering. Good and bad, right and wrong. Zen training is so subtle and so deep. You know, if you read the stories of the monasteries, particularly the Japanese monasteries, they are really severe. All that training is about reducing the ego to rubble. Now, in order to reduce it to rubble, usually it gets really big first. You know, you get really inflated and you get, I don't know, blown up and somebody punctures you and you really have to suffer. And then you get to look at your ego. Where did it just go? What happened to self? So this is experiential training in no self. So we carry some of that in our sort of minimalist sesshins. You know, all the forms are about letting go of getting it right. As soon as you start to get it right, somebody will change it. I'm already thinking about what I'm going to do to change it. That service went way too well this morning. I bet you were just thinking you got it down, huh? Wrong. It's much more fun being a Zen teacher than a Zen student. So, the rules in Zen monasteries are insane. You have to cross the lintel, you know, the place where you enter the zendo, with your left foot. Otherwise it's wrong. I mean, there's so many rules I can't even remember them all. I never got them all right anyway. Look at Oryoki training. Talk about a lot of rules. So, it's about learning to detach from getting it right. To detach from knowing. That's a big one. So much security, all false security, in knowing something, knowing how to do it, knowing the way it's supposed to be, knowing the answer. Big problem. It's hard to look at not knowing. Death is a good example. I was having a conversation with somebody recently about reincarnation, and I'm perfectly comfortable with saying maybe. I don't know. I just don't know. I don't know. The other person really believed in reincarnation, was disturbed that I wasn't willing to buy into it. It's not that I don't buy into it. I just don't know. Some people say that to be a Buddhist, you have to believe in reincarnation. Well, I'm a Buddhist. And I don't know if I believe in it or not. Belief is always a little tricky. Somebody once asked one of the Rinpoche, I was at a panel or some kind of presentation, and one of the Tibetan Rinpoches in the city, I forget his name, but well known, was asked if he believed in reincarnation and what his thoughts were about it. He said, well, if I didn't believe in it, I wouldn't have a job. That's all he would say about it. He'd be out of work. So our task is to see ourself at work, our ego at work. And that's what we see when we're in sesshin. We have that opportunity to see it, to notice how attached we are to our own self, our own thinking, our own thoughts. Not believing our thoughts is a big one. Our thoughts are conditioned reactions to most of our life. And they just keep popping up and causing us a lot of suffering. But that's not who we are. We are not what we think. We're much bigger, much deeper than our thoughts. We don't get stuck in the conditioning that gave us the thoughts that we think. There's so much greater potential, so much more to live. There's a good story here about Ganyo, Sanjo, and Joshu. This is a story I hadn't seen before. So, Ganyo Sonja was one of Joshu's, you know Joshu, you don't know Joshu. He was the monk that supposedly started teaching in his 80s and lived to be 120. I don't know if I believe all of that, but it's possible. People are living to be 120. Ganyo Sonja brought his mind for his teacher to examine, asking, after you have thrown everything away in practice, what do you do? So this is a fairly advanced student, been studying for a while, understands something, understands that he's had to let go over and over and over again, letting go of this, letting go of that. You know, you go to live in a Zen monastery, you're letting go of a lot. You're letting go of a career, you're letting go of a financial security, you're letting go of all the things that go with earning money, cars, trips, all kinds of things, family. Although Zen monks do marry. But nonetheless, they lead a very austere life, especially in Japan, in the beginning, in the early years. So after you have thrown everything away in practice, what do you do? So this question reveals Gonyo's seriousness of his practice. He's been working hard at letting go of this and letting go of that. But it also seems clear that even if all of his worldly desires had disappeared, he had become attached to the idea of his accomplishment of letting go of everything. Stuck right there. So Joshu answered very simply, throw it away. But Gonyo doesn't get it. He doesn't see his attachment to the idea that he's attained something. And this is a story by Kato Fukushima, a Rinzai teacher. It's a book just came out by a acquaintance of mine, Grace Shireson, and her husband Peter Shireson, who after completing Soto Zen training and becoming a Soto Zen teacher, decided she wanted to do koan study and took up with this Rinzai teacher. Started all over again doing koans. She's a very interesting woman, very bright psychologist also. So she put together these stories about her teacher, Kato Fukushima. So Kato Fukushima says there are conscious delusions, and those are the ones that he had been able to cut off. But there are also unconscious delusions, the ones that we don't see about ourselves. And those are what we need a teacher for. They help us see through the things that we can't see through. So, throw it away, Joshu responds, seeing very clearly his attachment to his attainment. But Gonyo Sonja didn't understand Joshu's answer. So he persisted with another question. I have no worldly desires, so what on earth do I throw away? So Joshu doesn't say very straightforwardly, well, your attachment to having attained something. That's probably what I would have said. Joshu much more subtly says, very well then, if you can't throw it away, then keep on carrying it. And Gonyo got it. He got it. He saw what he was carrying, the idea of enlightenment or achievement or some kind of attainment. Doesn't say whether he let it go or not. I thought it was a particularly good story about ego, how tenacious our egos are, how hard they hold on to us, and how they cause us to suffer. What do I do now? I finished it all. Good luck there. So I want to read you what the Diamond Sutra has to say about ego. No one attains transcendental wisdom. That's the name of chapter 17. Nothing to attain. It's so hard to get that in the beginning. There's nothing to attain. What am I doing sitting on my butt for a week? So the Buddha replied, good men and good women seeking the consummation of incomparable enlightenment must create this resolved attitude of mind. I must liberate all living beings. Yet when all have been liberated, verily not anyone is liberated. Wherefore, if a bodhisattva cherishes the idea of an ego entity, a personality, a being, or a separated individuality, he is consequently not a bodhisattva. This is because in reality there is no formula that gives rise to the consummation of incomparable enlightenment. There's no simple way to get there. In fact, all of you who are taking the Bandawa course know that ordinary mind is the way. It's our daily life. But we got to take our ego out of it. It's so hard to imagine. So if a bodhisattva announces, I will liberate all living creatures, he is not rightly called a bodhisattva. Wherefore? Because, Subhuti, there is really no such condition as that called bodhisattvaship. Because Buddha teaches that all things are devoid of selfhood, devoid of personality, devoid of entity, and devoid of separate individuality. Bodhisattvas who are wholly devoid of any conception of separate selfhood are truthfully called bodhisattvas. So, it's a journey. You don't get there in a day. It's a journey. How do you know when your ego is not up? It's not. You're not operating from that sense of ego. So listening to the birds. I posted the talks from our June session last year when Kozan was still with us. I really posted them so that his family could see his Dharma talk. And I don't remember it because we get so used to hearing the birds up here, but the birds are really chirping away during his Dharma talk. Mm. And his sister wrote back to me and said, I really enjoyed the Dharma talk. First of all, I didn't realize Kozan was really becoming a teacher. And secondly, the birds were so available. And then she named a couple of them just from the bird sound. So when we hear the birds, we heard them this morning when I opened the window. They were really loud and cheerful. We're just listening. There's no one there. Just the bird sound. That's why listening meditation is so important. I'll never forget that Dharma talk that Tan Sui gave on silence, where the birds were clearly listening because he called for a moment of silence and all the birds stopped. That was totally amazing. It was a moment of total, I don't know what, it was just incredible. It was total silence. A really powerful meditation experience I had was with the rattlesnakes. I've told you this story before. But this was in California in the mountains, and there were a lot of rattlesnakes that year. And they were on the back porch, all twisting. They were big ones, like 6-foot rattlesnakes, sort of twining around each other. Yeah, I know, we were all kind of scared. But they were so awesome. They were much more interested in the mice. They were there because there was a thing of mice. What's the word for when you get inundated with mice? Infestation. That was the word, thank you. Infestation of mice, so the rattlesnakes all came to eat the mice, and that was helpful. But we went out to look at them during walking meditation, keeping a distance, which may or may not have been safe. And they were just completely, I don't even know how to describe them. It was their territory. It was not our zendo. It was their territory. They were on the porch, which they made theirs. And they were kind of twined around each other doing this dance. I looked it up later to find out whether they were mating or not. And apparently male rattlesnakes do this kind of dance. It's not mating. It's maybe a competition or one of those things that males do, So, but they were way up high, like this high. Anyway, it was such a visual. So then I went back in to sit, and I could hear them, the rattles. You know, they were just on the other side of the wall, rattling away. And I had that image in my mind, and I completely became a snake in that 30-minute session. It was just a really amazing experience. I don't know where my ego was, but it was snaky ego. And then later, I got bitten by a tiny little baby rattlesnake. So I think I was completely initiated into the snake kingdom that day. So, paying attention to those moments where you're taken outside of yourself are moments of egolessness. It's one of the reasons that practice of immediacy is so valuable. Such a great teaching. Because we can become completely absorbed in making something, creating something, as long as we're not judging it. The moment you bring judgment in, it's gone. But just the creative act is an act of no ego. Just allowing whatever is coming up to come up and being with that moment. So I encourage you all to take that opportunity to do some practice of immediacy. So being here now, just this is it. Means cutting off our discriminating mind, our mind of judging, our mind of discernment. Doesn't mean trivializing it. We need that mind to operate in the world. This will work, this won't work. But for the purpose of Zazen practice, letting that go over and over and over is what we do. And it's liberating. I've never really liked the term enlightening. Never liked the term getting enlightened. But there is a real experience of liberation when you can free yourself of ego, when you can free yourself of self and just connect to this moment with whatever arises.